The town was small and quiet, surrounded by dust roads and broken buildings. In the middle of this forgotten place stood a little workshop made of rusted tin sheets and wooden planks. Inside, the poor mechanic worked every day with greasy hands, fixing old bicycles, repairing broken engines, and trying to earn enough for a single meal. His clothes were always dirty, and his face was marked with oil stains, but his eyes carried a gentle light that many people in town ignored. He was not rich, not powerful, but he had a gift. He could fix almost anything with patience and skill. Life had not been kind to him. He had lost his parents when he was young and had no family to support him. All he had was his little workshop and the old tools that had once belonged to his father. Each morning he would open the workshop with hope, even though he never knew if anyone would bring work that day. Some days he fixed a broken radio for a few coins. Other days he repaired a bicycle tire for a child and earned nothing. Still, he never turned people away. He believed that his hands were meant to help, even when his pocket was empty. One evening, as the sun was setting and the sky turned orange, a shadow appeared at the entrance of his workshop. A young woman walked slowly, limping on one leg. Her clothes were plain, and her hair was tied back neatly, but her eyes showed years of quiet suffering. The mechanic noticed right away that her prosthetic leg, an old and broken device, was bent and cracked. Every step she took looked painful, yet she did not complain. She reached the wooden chair near the workshop and sat down carefully, breathing heavily. The mechanic wiped his hands on a piece of cloth and approached her with concern. "Sister, what happened? Are you hurt?" he asked softly. The woman gave a tired smile and shook her head. "I have lived with this for many years," she explained. She tapped the broken prosthetic gently. "This leg was given to me a long time ago, but now it is useless. It hurts when I walk, and sometimes it breaks in the middle of the road. I went to the hospital, but they asked for so much money. I cannot afford it." Her voice was calm, but her words carried deep sadness. The mechanic looked at the device closely. It was old, rusty, and falling apart. No wonder she struggled. He thought about the modern prosthetics he had seen in newspapers. Lightweight, strong, but so expensive that ordinary people could never dream of them. He felt anger rising inside, but he stayed quiet. The woman lowered her head as if embarrassed to even ask for help. "I thought maybe you could repair it. I know you are not a doctor, but people told me you can fix anything," she said softly. The mechanic felt a lump in his throat. He knew he was not a doctor, not an engineer who built medical devices. He was just a poor man who worked with broken bicycles and engines. But when he looked at her eyes full of pain but also hope, he could not say no. "I will try," he said firmly. The woman looked surprised. "But I have no money to pay you," she whispered. He shook his head. "Do not worry about money. Let me see what I can do. Sometimes kindness is more important than coins." She smiled, a small smile that seemed to carry gratitude larger than words. He asked her to leave the broken prosthetic with him, promising to return it the next day. As she walked away with difficulty, leaning on a wooden stick, the mechanic felt something change in his heart. This was not just another repair job. This was a chance to give someone back their dignity, their ability to walk without pain. That night, after closing his shop, he did not go home. He sat at his workbench with a single lamp glowing faintly. The streets outside were silent, but inside the sound of tools echoed. He took the broken prosthetic apart piece by piece, studying the design, the joints, the straps. It was complicated, and he felt fear for a moment. What if he failed? What if his attempt made it worse? But then he remembered the woman's face, the way she had trusted him even though she barely knew him. That trust gave him strength. He searched through his piles of scrap metal and broken machines. He found steel rods, springs from old bicycles, rubber from a discarded tire, and even parts from a washing machine motor. With imagination and steady hands, he began to shape them. He heated the metal, bent it into form, hammered it until it looked strong yet flexible. Sweat rolled down his forehead as sparks flew from the welding. His stomach growled with hunger, but he ignored it. His heart beat with determination. Hours passed, and his small workshop filled with smoke, the smell of burning metal, and the sound of grinding wheels. Outside, dogs barked at the noise, but the mechanic did not stop. He worked with focus, as if guided by something greater than himself. At times he spoke quietly to himself. "Stronger here, lighter there. It must not hurt her when she walks." He tested each joint, making sure it could bend smoothly. He wrapped soft cloth around the inner part so her skin would not get scratched. Every detail mattered. By midnight, his hands were shaking from exhaustion. He looked at what he had created. A simple prosthetic leg. Not beautiful. Not polished like the ones in hospitals, but sturdy and practical. It was a creation born not from money, but from care. He held it up to the light and whispered, "This will work." It must. Finally, as dawn began to break, he placed the finished prosthetic on his workbench and collapsed into a chair. His eyes closed, and for the first time in days he allowed himself to rest. His stomach was empty, but his heart felt full. He had given all his strength to this work, not for profit, but for kindness. He hoped it would change her life, even a little. The next morning, the woman returned. She walked slowly, still struggling with her broken leg, and entered the workshop with cautious hope. The mechanic stood waiting, holding the prosthetic carefully in his hands. "I made this for you," he said simply. She gasped, her eyes wide in disbelief. You built this?" He nodded. "It is not perfect, but try it. If it hurts, I will fix it again." With trembling hands, she sat down, removed her old prosthetic, and allowed him to fit the new one. He adjusted the straps gently, making sure it was tight but comfortable. Then he stepped back. "Now try to stand," he encouraged. The woman took a deep breath, placed her weight on the new leg, and slowly rose to her feet. For a moment she wobbled, uncertain. Then she took one step, then another. Her eyes filled with tears. It works," she whispered. She walked across the workshop, steady and strong, something she had not done in years without pain. The mechanic watched quietly, his heart swelling with pride. He had given her more than just a leg. He had given her freedom. The woman turned back to him, tears rolling down her cheeks, and whispered, "Thank you. You do not know what this means to me." He smiled softly and said, "I only did what any human should do. May your steps take you to a better tomorrow." And in that small workshop, filled with grease and broken tools, a miracle had quietly happened, one that no one in town could have imagined. The sun had barely risen when the mechanic returned to his workshop. His eyes were heavy from working all night, but his heart felt lighter than it had in years. He had seen the woman walk with her new prosthetic, and that memory was enough to give him strength. As he wiped down his tools and put away scraps of metal, neighbors passed by. Some glanced inside, some stopped to whisper, but few offered any words of kindness. In that small town, poverty often blinded people to the quiet greatness around them. The woman had left his shop the evening before, walking with a new sense of freedom. She had looked back once, her face glowing with gratitude, but the mechanic had simply smiled and waved. He never expected anything in return. To him, the joy of seeing her take steady steps was the only reward he needed. Yet as he sat on the stool near his workbench, doubts crept into his mind. He wondered if the prosthetic would last. He worried that his simple design made from scraps might break under her weight. He wished he had better tools, better materials. But then he remembered her smile and her steady steps, and his heart calmed again. That night, while the town rested, the mechanic had worked with a determination that even hunger could not break. He had eaten nothing but a stale piece of bread, and still he labored on until dawn. For him, this was not about money or fame. It was about helping someone who had been left behind by the world. It was about proving that even a poor man could make a difference with his hands and his heart. As the morning grew brighter, he walked outside to breathe the cool air. The street was alive with gossip as usual. He heard murmurs from two men passing by. "Did you hear? That fool tried to build a leg for that crippled woman," one said with a smirk. The other laughed. "A mechanic making a leg? What nonsense. It will break in a week, and then both of them will look like fools." The mechanic lowered his eyes but did not reply. He had grown used to such words. People often mocked what they did not understand. Instead of arguing, he returned to his workshop and picked up a broken radio to repair. He had no time to waste on bitterness. Meanwhile, the woman walked through the market streets with her new prosthetic. At first, people stared, surprised by her steady steps. She no longer leaned on her stick as heavily, and her gait was smoother. Some admired her strength quietly, but others whispered cruelly, wondering how long it would last. She ignored their words, her heart still echoing the kindness of the man who had helped her without asking for anything. That night, she sat by her window, staring at the stars. She thought about the mechanic's tired eyes and rough hands, about the way he had worked without food or rest to make something that changed her life. She thought about how the world had laughed at him, but how he had proven them wrong. A plan began to form in her mind. She could not simply accept his kindness and walk away. She needed to do something that would honor his gift and show the world what kind of man he truly was. The next morning, the mechanic woke early again. His stomach was empty, but he ignored the hunger. He busied himself repairing a bicycle chain when suddenly, the woman returned to his shop. She walked more confidently than before, her steps echoing on the dusty floor. The sight made him smile. "How is it?" he asked, his voice filled with quiet hope. She grinned. "It is better than I imagined. I walked to the market, I climbed my front steps without pain, and I even stood for hours without needing to rest." The mechanic's heart swelled with relief. "I'm glad," he said simply. "If it ever breaks, come back. I will fix it again." The woman studied him for a moment, her eyes soft. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Why spend your nights working for me when I could give you nothing in return?" He paused, surprised by the question. Then he looked down at his hands, calloused and scarred from years of labor. "Because sometimes life is not about coins," he said slowly. "It is about giving someone hope when they have none. I know what it is like to live without help. If my hands can bring someone a little comfort, then that is enough for me." The woman's eyes grew moist and she turned away quickly to hide her tears. She realized then that this man was richer in spirit than anyone she had ever met. She nodded, then quietly said, "One day I will repay you." The mechanic chuckled softly. "There is nothing to repay. If you walk freely, that is all I need." After she left, the day dragged on with little work. A few boys brought a bicycle to fix. An old man asked him to repair a broken fan, but the coins he earned were barely enough for bread and tea. Yet he worked with the same devotion as always. The whispers from neighbors grew louder. He wasted his time on that woman, some said. He could have fixed machines that brought money instead. Others sneered. Even if it works, what difference does it make? He is still poor. But the mechanic did not let their words wound him. He remembered the smile of the woman, the gratitude in her eyes, and that was enough to carry him through the day. As evening fell, he lit the small lamp again and worked late into the night. This time he repaired an engine that had been left with him weeks ago. Yet in the back of his mind, he kept seeing her face as she took those first steps in his creation. Far away, the woman was making preparations of her own. She had not told the mechanic the truth. She was not just a poor woman struggling alone. She had a background that most people in the small town could not imagine, but she had chosen to keep it hidden because she wanted to know who would help her without expecting anything in return. Now she knew. The mechanic had passed the test that life itself had set for him. That night she spoke with someone on the phone in a hushed voice. Arrangements were made, promises exchanged. When she ended the call, she looked once more at her prosthetic, sturdy and strong, and whispered, "Tomorrow the world will know who he is." The mechanic, unaware of her plans, slept in his little workshop. His bed was an old wooden cot, his blanket thin and worn. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks in the tin roof and the night was cold. But his heart was warm. He had done something good, something meaningful. He believed that was enough. Little did he know. The next morning would bring a sound that no one in the town had ever heard before. The powerful roar of a helicopter cutting through the sky, heading straight toward his humble workshop. The night had been long for the mechanic. The thin blanket on his wooden cot barely kept away the cold, and the sound of wind whistling through the cracks in his tin roof made it hard to rest. Still, whenever he closed his eyes, he could see the woman walking across his workshop with steady steps. That memory made all the discomfort easier to bear. For him, that moment was worth more than any coin, more than any praise. He had no idea that the coming day would change everything. As dawn broke, he woke with stiff muscles and empty stomach. He washed his face with cold water from an old tin basin, then opened his workshop to start another day. The streets outside were slowly filling with people heading to the market. A few waved at him politely, but most passed by without notice. He sat on his stool and picked up a broken radio, his hands moving skillfully even though his thoughts were elsewhere. He wondered how the woman was doing with her new prosthetic. Would it last? Would it break? Was she walking somewhere right now without pain? These questions filled his mind. By mid-morning, a group of boys stopped outside his workshop. They whispered loudly enough for him to hear. "That mechanic thinks he's a doctor now," one said, laughing. Another added, "I heard he made a leg out of bicycle parts. Imagine that. It will snap like a twig." The boys burst into laughter and ran off. The mechanic sighed, not angry but a little hurt. He wished people could see what kindness meant. But he also knew that most only cared about money or status. He bent his head back to his work, deciding that his hands would answer where words could not. Far away, the woman was waking up in a very different place. Her house was not as poor as she had made it seem. In fact, it was spacious with polished floors and wide windows. She had lived simply in the town to test people's hearts, hiding her true background. That morning she walked across her living room with her new prosthetic, every step filling her with both gratitude and determination. She looked out the window where a sleek black car waited, its driver ready for instructions. She whispered softly to herself, "Today he will know who I am. Today the world will see him as I do." The mechanic worked all day with little food. A farmer brought in a broken water pump and he spent hours repairing it. When he finished, the farmer paid him only half of what was promised, muttering that the work was too slow. The mechanic accepted quietly. He had grown used to being undervalued. Later, as the sun began to set, he closed his shop, his body aching from labor. He sat outside on the wooden step, watching the sky turn red and gold. In the distance, he saw the woman again, walking slowly down the road. For a moment, his heart lifted. She looked stronger, her steps more confident. She waved at him with a smile, and he waved back. That was enough to brighten his tired spirit. That night, the mechanic cooked a simple meal of rice and lentils. He ate alone in the dim light, then sat at his workbench once more. He examined the leftover scraps from the prosthetic he had built. He ran his fingers over the rough metal and wondered if he could improve it. His mind kept working even when his body wanted to rest. He imagined making lighter, stronger designs, ones that could help more people like her. But such dreams felt too big for a poor man with nothing but broken tools. He sighed and lay back on his cot, staring at the ceiling until sleep finally claimed him. The woman, however, did not sleep so easily. She was on the phone late into the night, speaking in quiet tones. Arrangements were made, permissions granted, and plans confirmed. When she finally ended the call, she sat on the edge of her bed and touched her prosthetic. She whispered, "Tomorrow everything changes." She thought of the mechanic's words, his gentle promise that he did not need repayment, but she knew he deserved more than silent gratitude. He deserved to be seen, to be honored, to be given a chance to rise from the shadows. She smiled softly, her heart filled with determination. The next morning began like any other. The mechanic opened his workshop early, yawning and stretching his stiff arms. He prepared to face another day of repairing broken fans, bicycles, and engines. The air was calm and the town was quiet. Then suddenly a strange sound filled the sky, a deep, thundering roar that grew louder every second. People in the market stopped and looked up. Children pointed eyes wide. Dogs barked and ran in circles. The mechanic stepped out of his workshop, wiping grease from his hands, and looked toward the horizon. A helicopter was approaching, its blades cutting through the air with power. Dust swirled around the streets as it descended, and people ran to see what was happening. No one in the small town had ever seen such a sight before. The mechanic shielded his eyes from the flying dust, his heart racing in confusion. Why would a helicopter come here to this forgotten place? Neighbors gathered around, murmuring in shock. Who could it be? A minister? A rich businessman? They asked one another. The mechanic stood silently, unsure what to think. The helicopter landed just a short distance from his workshop. The noise was deafening, and the wind from the blades nearly knocked over the small wooden sign that hung above his shop. The townspeople crowded closer, their curiosity burning. The door of the helicopter opened slowly, and out stepped the woman. She looked different now, her posture straight, her movements confident, her clothes elegant. She no longer leaned on a stick, no longer struggled with each step. She walked gracefully, the prosthetic strong beneath her. The crowd gasped in disbelief. The mechanic's eyes widened. He could hardly believe it was the same woman he had helped. She walked toward him with a warm smile, while behind her stepped out men in suits carrying briefcases and cameras. Reporters, photographers, and officials had come with her. The townspeople whispered louder, stunned by the scene. Is that the same woman? How did she come in a helicopter? Who is she really? The mechanic felt overwhelmed, unable to understand what was happening. The woman stopped in front of him, her eyes shining with gratitude. She spoke clearly, her voice carrying above the noise of the crowd. "This is the man who gave me back my life," she said. "He built this prosthetic with his hands, not for money, not for fame, but out of kindness. He is more than a mechanic. He is a genius, a man with a golden heart." The crowd fell silent. Even those who had mocked him now stood frozen, their faces red with shame. The mechanic looked around, his chest tight with emotion. He did not know what to say. He had expected nothing, yet here she was, standing before him in front of the entire town, lifting him higher than he had ever been in his life. His hands, calloused and dirty, shook slightly as he realized something extraordinary was about to begin. The dust swirled around the small workshop as the helicopter's blades slowed. The crowd pressed closer, murmuring in disbelief. No one in this poor town had ever seen such a thing before. Mothers held their children up to see. Old men shaded their eyes, and shopkeepers left their stalls unattended. All eyes were fixed on the woman who had stepped down from the shining machine, walking with confidence on the leg the poor mechanic had built. For a moment, time seemed to pause. The mechanic stood rooted to the spot, his heart beating faster with each step she took toward him. She moved with grace, no trace of the limp that had once slowed her. The wind from the helicopter lifted her hair gently as she walked across the dirt road, her gaze fixed only on him. The people who had once mocked him now stared with wide eyes, whispering to one another, "Is that really her? How did she come in a helicopter? What is happening?" The mechanic could hear their voices, but he felt as though he was in a dream. Behind her, men in suits followed, carrying cameras, files, and microphones. Some were engineers, others reporters, and a few looked like investors or officials. They scanned the workshop curiously, surprised to see such a simple place at the center of so much attention. The mechanic rubbed his hands nervously against his worn trousers, his mind struggling to understand what was unfolding. He had expected nothing when he built the prosthetic. He had thought it would be a quiet act of kindness forgotten by the world. Yet here was proof that his small act was about to become something much larger. When she reached him, the woman stopped and smiled warmly. Her eyes carried the same gratitude as before, but now they also carried pride. She turned toward the crowd and raised her voice so everyone could hear. "This man changed my life," she declared. "When no hospital cared, when no one offered help, he worked through the night with nothing but scraps and determination. He built me this prosthetic that allows me to walk freely again. He did it not for money, not for recognition, but out of kindness. Today I stand tall because of him." The crowd gasped, their earlier whispers silenced by her words. Some bowed their heads in shame, remembering how they had mocked the mechanic. Others looked on with awe, their faces filled with respect they had never shown before. Children clutched their parents' hands, eyes shining with wonder as they gazed at the man who had quietly performed such a miracle. The mechanic felt his face flush. He shifted uncomfortably, unused to so many eyes on him. "I only did what I could," he said softly, almost to himself. But the woman heard, and she shook her head. "No, you did what others would not even try, and now the world must know your worth." One of the suited men stepped forward and introduced himself as a journalist from a large newspaper. He carried a camera and a notebook, eager to capture every detail. Another man, dressed in a sharp black suit, explained that he was an engineer who had studied advanced prosthetics abroad. He examined the mechanic's creation with curiosity, marveling at its design. "This is incredible," he said. "You built this with only basic tools and recycled parts? The balance, the weight, the strength, it all works perfectly. You have done something that even trained experts would struggle to do with limited resources." The mechanic's hands trembled slightly as the man inspected his work. He had never thought of himself as a genius. To him, it was just common sense, hard work, and compassion. Yet hearing professionals speak so highly of what he had made filled him with a quiet pride he could not hide. The woman stepped closer to him and spoke in a softer voice. "I did not tell you before, but I am not just an ordinary woman from this town. My family is known across the country. My father built industries, and I grew up in comfort. But I wanted to know who would help me when I had nothing. I wanted to see if kindness still existed in the world. You proved it does. And because of you, I have returned not as a helpless woman, but as someone who can now give back." Her words stunned him. He blinked in disbelief, trying to process the revelation. She continued, louder now, addressing the entire crowd. "I came back today in this helicopter not to show wealth, but to show what true wealth is. This man, in his small workshop with no riches or power, gave me a gift greater than money.
He gave me dignity.
And now it is my turn to lift him up. The reporters scribbled quickly, cameras clicked, and the crowd leaned forward to hear every word. The mechanic felt overwhelmed, his heart heavy with emotion. He thought of the many nights he had gone hungry, the years of being ignored, the cruel words of those who saw him as nothing. And now before his very eyes, all of that was being washed away by this moment of recognition. The woman raised her hand, signaling to the men behind her. One of them opened a case, pulling out documents. Another carried a microphone connected to a speaker, and soon her voice carried across the entire street. "Today I announce a new project," she said with determination. "Together with engineers and investors, we will build an initiative to create affordable prosthetics for people across the country. No one should suffer simply because they are poor. And the man who will lead this project is none other than the mechanic who built my leg. His workshop will no longer be a forgotten corner. It will be the place where lives are transformed." The crowd erupted in gasps. Some clapped, some shouted in excitement, others stood frozen in awe. The mechanic, unable to believe what he was hearing, shook his head slowly. "Me, lead a project?" he whispered. His voice trembled, not with fear, but with disbelief. The woman looked him directly in the eyes. "Yes, you, because you have the heart that no amount of education or wealth can buy.
Skills can be taught.
But kindness cannot. You already have what the world needs most." Tears filled the mechanic's eyes, though he tried to hide them. He looked down at his calloused hands that had been ridiculed, ignored, and undervalued. Now those very hands were being recognized as the tools of hope. The crowd began to cheer louder, chanting his name, celebrating the man they had once overlooked. Children pointed at him with admiration, calling him a hero. In that moment, the mechanic felt something he had never felt before, dignity that filled his heart like sunlight. For years he had believed he was nothing more than a poor man fixing scraps. Now he realized that his kindness and skill had the power to change not just one life, but many. The helicopter stood waiting behind the woman, gleaming in the sunlight like a symbol of the new world opening before him. The reporters crowded around, asking questions, snapping photos, eager to carry his story beyond the town. And through it all, the mechanic stood humbly, whispering to himself, "I only wanted to help." But the truth was clear. He had done far more than help. He had lit a spark that was about to grow into a fire of hope for thousands. The cheers of the crowd echoed in the dusty street long after the woman's words ended. The mechanic stood still, his mind spinning with disbelief. He had never seen so many people gathered in front of his small workshop, and he had certainly never been the center of such attention. His workshop, once ignored and forgotten, had become the heart of the entire town that morning. Cameras flashed, reporters called his name, and children tried to push forward for a closer look. Yet through all the noise and excitement, he felt strangely quiet inside, as if his heart was too full to speak. The woman turned to him, her eyes shining with both gratitude and determination. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "You gave me a gift that cannot be measured in money," she said softly. "Now it is time for me to give you a gift in return. You will not be alone anymore. From this day, the world will know what you can do." The mechanic looked at her with confusion. "I don't understand," he whispered. She smiled gently. "You will." One of the suited men came forward, carrying a thick folder of documents. He handed it to the woman, who then placed it carefully in the mechanic's hands. "This," she explained, "is an agreement, a project funded by my family's foundation and supported by engineers and doctors. It will begin with building a proper workshop right here, with modern tools, equipment, and materials. But it will not stop there. We will expand across the country. Thousands of disabled people who cannot afford expensive prosthetics will be able to walk again because of what you began in this small shop." The mechanic's hands shook as he held the folder. His eyes scanned the pages, though the words blurred through the tears that filled them. He looked up, his voice trembling. "You want me to lead this?" "Yes," the woman said firmly. "Because you are the heart of it. Machines and money cannot replace compassion. You built something with love and patience, not for profit, but for humanity. That is what we need. You will guide us. You will teach us. You will be the reason this dream grows." The crowd erupted into applause. Reporters raised their microphones, asking the mechanic how he felt. He struggled to find words. For so many years, he had lived quietly, invisible to most people. His days had been filled with broken radios, bicycles, and engines. He had often gone to sleep hungry, uncertain how he would survive the next day. Now, suddenly, the future looked brighter than he had ever imagined. He looked at the woman, still unable to believe this was real. "Why me?" he asked softly. She answered with a smile. "Because when I had nothing to offer, you still gave me everything. That is why." The helicopter pilot signaled that it was time to leave, but before they departed, the woman asked the mechanic to join her. "Come," she said, holding out her hand. "See what awaits you." The mechanic hesitated. He looked back at his small workshop, its walls patched with rusted tin, its roof bent and broken, the place where he had spent his life. It was humble and worn, yet it was also the place where his greatest creation had been born. He took a deep breath, then stepped forward and placed his hand in hers. Together they walked toward the helicopter. The crowd parted as they moved. People who had once mocked him now reached out to touch his hand, to congratulate him, to apologize with their eyes. Some shouted blessings, others simply smiled. Children waved eagerly, shouting, "Hero, hero!" The mechanic felt overwhelmed but also deeply moved. For the first time he felt seen, respected, valued. As he climbed into the helicopter, the crowd cheered louder. The blades roared to life, stirring the air, lifting dust and hope together. The mechanic looked down from the window as the town grew smaller beneath him. He saw the faces of neighbors who had once laughed at him now gazing upward with admiration. He saw his little workshop shrinking into the distance, no longer just a forgotten shack, but now a symbol of change. Beside him, the woman leaned close and spoke above the noise of the blades. "This is only the beginning," she said. "We will travel to the city, meet with more people, and begin the work. Your hands will no longer fix only small things. They will rebuild lives." Tears slid down the mechanic's cheeks as he nodded. He had never dreamed of flying in a helicopter. Never imagined that his life could change so completely in just 2 days. From a poor man struggling to survive, he was now being carried into a future filled with purpose and hope. When they landed in the city, reporters and photographers were already waiting. The story of the mechanic had spread quickly. Headlines began to appear in newspapers. "Poor mechanic builds life-changing prosthetic from scrap and a gift of kindness sparks national movement." News channels played footage of him standing shyly outside his workshop as the woman declared his greatness. Overnight, he became a symbol of hope, an example of what one person's compassion could achieve. In the days that followed, offers of support poured in. Factories offered materials, engineers offered designs, doctors offered guidance. But through it all, the woman made sure everyone knew the truth. The heart of the project was the mechanic. It was his vision, his spirit that inspired it all. He was not pushed aside or overshadowed. Instead, he was placed at the center, where he belonged. The mechanic found himself standing in conference halls, speaking to groups of people who once would never have noticed him. He spoke in simple words, his voice humble, but his message powerful. "Do not wait for wealth to do good," he told them. "Do not wait for recognition. Help with what you have, where you are. Kindness is stronger than money, stronger than pride. It is what makes life meaningful." Each time he spoke, people listened in silence, their hearts moved by the sincerity of his words. He was not polished or trained, but his honesty was more powerful than any rehearsed speech. Months later, a new workshop was built in his town. It was large, with clean floors, modern machines, and enough space to build many prosthetics at once. The mechanic walked through it with awe, remembering the days he had worked with broken tools in a tin shack. Now he had a team of young apprentices eager to learn from him. He guided them patiently, teaching them not only the skills of building but also the importance of compassion. The woman often visited, arriving not in secret anymore but openly, standing beside him as a partner in the mission. Together they oversaw the creation of dozens, then hundreds of prosthetics, each one given freely to someone in need. The workshop became a place of hope, where lives were transformed daily. One evening, as the sun set over the town, the mechanic stood outside the new workshop. He listened to the laughter of children who had just received new legs and were running freely for the first time. He watched the tears of mothers who embraced their children, thanking him with words too small for their gratitude. He felt a deep peace settle in his heart. The woman joined him, her eyes shining with the same gratitude as on the first day. "Do you see now?" she asked gently. "This is what you were meant for." The mechanic smiled softly. "I only wanted to help one person," he said. "I never imagined it would grow like this." She nodded. That is the beauty of kindness. It never stays small. It spreads, it multiplies, and it changes the world. The mechanic looked at his hands, scarred and rough, but now honored and respected. He realized that true wealth was not in money or possessions, but in the ability to touch lives, to give hope, to build dignity. He had once been a poor man in a forgotten workshop, but now he was something greater, a symbol of humanity's power to rise through compassion. And as the stars appeared in the night sky, the mechanic whispered to himself with quiet pride, "This is only the beginning."